So AIG in September of '08, AIG effectively gets wiped out. AIG, biggest insurance company in the world, had the government basically took over AIG, infused, I think it's somewhere around $400 billion, so that they could honor, they infused the money so they could honor these claims to make sure that the bonds that they sold didn't go in free fall. Okay? So that was one thing where the government really came in. This was an event that happened around September 15th, 2008, was mind-boggling, that the government would go into and support a third-party business, American Insurance Group. And the reason is AIG had sold these insurance products to Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Lehman Brothers, Bank of America, Citigroup Group, had sold it to everybody. But they never put the reserves aside to meet the underlying risk. So, unfortunately, the government, if they let AIG essentially go into bankruptcy and liquidate, the belief was it would have brought the whole global, not just the U.S., the whole global financial system down. Like you probably couldn't access your bank account, down. So the government decided to go in and bail out AIG. And by providing support to AIG, financial support, I think they put in $400 billion, it allowed these bonds to retain their value. And one of the problems you had when Bear Stearns got in trouble because they owned this mortgage-backed security, everybody who else owned them, they were trying to sell them at the same time. So when you get everybody selling and nobody buying, soon the price goes to 50, which creates major trauma for anybody who owns it. So people like Bear Stearns had a problem at 80. Now you had Merrill Lynch had a massive problem. And so Merrill Lynch, the only thing they could do is force a shotgun marriage, right? So they went through a merger process. You had another commercial bank, Wachovia, they had to go into the merger process. And the government developed a program called TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program, to essentially bolster up the banks and give them liquidity and allow them to go buy these assets. So when these bonds were now traded at 50, part of that problem was there was nobody who was reasonably going into the market and buying them. So that you have 10,000 bonds for sale and one guy looking to buy 100. And what happens is you've got this disequilibrium in the market, and the price keeps falling. So the government developed this program called TARP, and they said, okay, Bank of America, we're going to give you $100 billion. But part of what you've got to do with that $100 billion is you've got to go buy these troubled assets. Okay? And we've got to be able to support the asset base here, because if we let these fail, if the government doesn't step in, the global financial system crashes. And the implications of that were pretty significant. Had the government not supported AIG on like September 15th, this domino effect would have collapsed all the major financial institutions in the U.S. and most of the major financial institutions around the world. And so, very, very critical, very extraordinary time. The government intervention was pretty amazing. The guy running the Treasury at the time, Hank Paulson, actually was formerly CEO. He was Secretary of Treasury under Bush, but he was CEO of Goldman Sachs. And so he understood all the complexity underlying this whole series of transactions. And he knew, at the end of the day, that AIG was too big to fail. No one ever appreciated that AIG could take the whole system down. And if the government not supported it, it would have been, the worst financial quagmire, ever. I mean, it would have been brutal. So the TARP program came in and infused capital into a variety of different banks. The government took over a lot of entities like Fannie Mae and Ginnie Mae. And what's come out of this, I'd say, in the last 18 months, sort of the lesson learned is that you have to have better disciplined lending standards here. You have to be careful of this sort of lending against inflated real estate prices. And the banks, really, no one really understood what risk they really had. They didn't understand that. They thought, okay, well, if I've got a high default rate, I'll just go to AIG and they're going to make me whole because they sold me this insurance policy. Problem is, they had not really covered their risk. AIG had no capability to insure, to honor the claims that they had made. So this is kind of a quick overview of what happened, a little bit of why it happened. I think people point to the housing bubble and the inexpensive credit, some products that had low teaser rates that would entice people to come in and borrow, and then a correction in the housing market. When the housing bubble burst, it triggered these defaults. And when all these defaults came about, it crushed the financial system. So government intervention was staggering. And the implications today are that the banks who took the money, and the investment banks took money from the government wants to regulate them more aggressively. The investment banks currently aren't regulated. Hedge funds are not regulated, and the Treasury and the SEC want to have greater oversight. So this doesn't happen again. They want to determine how much CEOs are compensated, and they want to make sure that you've got pretty good disciplined lending standards, so we don't get into the same mess we got into. The flip side of it is when they're trying to tighten credit, restrict the amount of lending goes on. You'll hear Obama get up on the podium and talk about what you need to do is the banks need to be lending money to small and medium-sized businesses so we can grow the economy and create jobs. When this whole mess took place in 08 and 09, the banks just stopped lending money to businesses, to individuals. Credit card companies contained their lending. So what that did is curtail the economic growth, and went into sort of a potential recessionary environment. What Obama's trying to do from a policy point of view is entice lending, get more credit back into the system, create jobs, stem the decline in the unemployment rate has been double digits, and how does he create new job growth? So the policy, what's interesting on the policy side is he's going to try and solve it with some monetary policy strategies here. If I can get the lending, the engine restarted in the banks, I can begin lending to businesses. If there's credit in the market, people will begin to hire and expand, etc. So in my lifetime, this scenario played out realistically in a couple of years, but it came close to wiping out the whole global financial system as we know. I mean, very close. Like, I'm not sure what would have happened if they let AIG fail. All of these institutions, not just in the U.S., but around the world, that are very interlinked and intertwined, would have collapsed. They would not have been, if you went to your Wells Fargo account on Monday to withdraw cash, it may not be working. And that's the implication for you. I mean, Wells Fargo may freeze all the assets and your checking account. You can't withdraw money. Would have created hysteria and panic.